I think the biggest thing that he has done in this budget, which I think is the right thing to do, is to stick to fiscal discipline. And I think that creates a huge amount of confidence around the world that we are not slipping on our numbers. We are like a bulwark, we are like a torchlight amongst the most of the countries in the world, because it indicates stability, it creates confidence in the economy, and it shows fiscal discipline. But has he done this at the cost of growth? I am not so sure. I think there is focus on growth because the spend that is being planned on infrastructure will actually help to drive some of the growth that is coming through. With all this happening, the RBI is going to get more comfort, and one expects that the RBI will drop interest rates in the next quarter or two, which in turn will trigger more investment. So I think all in all, I would say that that fiscal discipline position that has been taken is noteworthy and something I would strongly support instead of slipping on it. But India still has a very low tax to GDP ratio, among the lowest in the world. And clearly there are steps that the government is going to have to take to widen the tax base and to catch the big fish and probably also unearth black money. And Anil will speak about that, I'm sure, as we go along. The fiscal numbers in the budget do appear reasonable. Most cases, there are one or two areas that I would question. For example, I am told that the 7th pay commission, which is going to cost the government more than ₹1 lakh crore, is not entirely budgeted for, only half of it I am told. And the projected growth for next year is still quite healthy at about 7.5% as stated by the IMF. The government itself is saying 7 to 7.75%. I think to get to this growth, had GST come in, it would have certainly helped, but it's not. You all know the reasons for that, but that is something which has not yet happened. Looking at some of the key policy announcements, I'm just going to touch on the FDI sector, and I'll pick only on one. I know this government was against multi-brand retail. But importantly, the change that has been made in the context of food products and allowing 100% foreign investment in food products is, I think, a very significant move. And to respond partly to Mr. Advani's query, this can potentially make investment in India from American companies like the Walmarts of this world very interesting. It could actually allow them to come up and set up here food retail stores. And it would benefit our farmers, because I don't know if you are aware, but 92,000 crores of food wastage occurs every year in India. We can ill afford that as a country. This is hopefully going to go some way towards reducing that. So this is a very significant change on the FDI part. There are several other changes. As I've said, I'm only going to list a few of these as we go along on the slides. So these are only the highlights. Coming to some of the quickly to the tax proposals. I think overall, the finance minister seems to be moving towards a stable tax regime, trying to provide less litigation, be less confrontationist. We've had disasters when it's come to Vodafone in the past, the message that it's sent out, some of the things that we've done around MAT. So I think the effort here is to simplify, to rationalize, to reduce litigation, and that's why you see so many changes that have been proposed. In terms of tax rates, pretty much no change as far as foreign companies are concerned, and they have now clarified in the law that MAT will not apply from the date when it was first introduced into the law. For domestic companies, there's going to be the option for new manufacturing companies which will be set up, that you can be taxed at 25% rather than 30%, provided you do not claim any other deductions other than one deduction relating to additional employment, ATJJA. But otherwise, you could be taxed at 25%. Of course, the fact is that new companies may not have profit in the first 2 years. So to some extent, this is, it is what it is. A tax rate of 29% is proposed for businesses, small companies with turnovers of less than 5 crore rupees or 50 million. For individuals who have income over 1 crore rupees per year, the surcharge is proposed to be increased to 15% from the earlier 12%. I know the rich have been complaining, but in a country like ours, I guess the rich have to pay up a little bit more so long as that tax is applied effectively without leakages for the benefit of the poorer section of the society. Mind you, there are many other developed countries in the world which have very high rates, much higher rates of tax than India has. Let me quickly touch on startups. There is a tax break offered to startups, and startups are defined to say that for 3 consecutive years out of the first 5 years from the date of incorporation, not startup of the business, date of incorporation, you will be allowed a tax break. There is also certain long-term capital gains exemption provided if investments are made prior to March 19 in a notified fund of funds. They are going to notify it, but in the speech there is a reference, and in the memorandum to the finance bill there is a reference to a fund of funds. Of course, please note that these investments are high-risk investments. Those startups may fail, but capital gains tax exemption has been offered. Similarly, there is also a capital gains tax exemption for people who invest, who own more than 50% of a startup, and if they invest in the shares of that startup company. Dividend. So this one, I am not in favor of this change. If you wanted to collect more tax, you would have done it in different ways. Simply for the reason I think this is what I call triple jeopardy. First, when you make profits, you pay corporate tax. Out of that post-tax income, which is already being taxed, you then pay a dividend distribution tax. And when that DDT was brought in by our earlier Finance Minister Chidambaram, who and his son, of course, in the news these days, but at that time a promise had been made by the government that instead of taxing the recipient of the dividend, we will now tax it as a DDT, a dividend distribution tax at the corporate level. What they have now done is, if you have income from dividends exceeding 10 lakh rupees a year, cough up 10% more. So there's effectively a triple taxation on this. Interestingly, there's also a discrimination between a resident and a non-resident. So if you have a non-resident investor earning dividends, he is not going to be hit by this 10% tax. I don't see why we should be discriminated against. So you will see lots of interim dividends come out in the next 1 month, because this proposal comes into play from 1st of April, which is less than a month ago. Let me deal with some of the proposals relating to international taxes in a sense. There is now a certain tax break provided if you set in a unit in an international financial service center. I don't know if you are aware, but when Mr. Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he set up what is known as Gift City in Ahmedabad. The Gift City will be the first one. It's got 2 towers, and they've been pushing people to make that happen. Lots of insurance, etc. are being pulled towards that. So that will be one of the first ones who will get the benefit of the International Financial Services Center. And what are the benefits? Long-term capital gains will be exempt, even if STT is not paid. The rate of MAT is reduced from the 18.5% for others to 9% here, and the dividend distribution tax will not apply. So these are certain benefits available to entities like the Gift City, set up in the Gift City. Very significant changes coming out of the OECD BEPS proposals. And these have been discussed in the tax world for the last couple of years, strongly supported by the G20. So when the G20 met, they pretty much agreed, and therefore all countries around the world have got broad agreement on the 15 actions that the BEPS plan talks about. And one of those relates to country by country reporting. Here you must maintain this for transfer pricing, a local file in terms of how you transfer price between group entities, a master file, what you do around the world in all your group entities, as well as the allocation within the group. Mind you, this doesn't apply to smaller companies, it applies only to large companies. And while this is yet to be technically notified in India, the OECD has talked of 750 million euros. So it's not small companies, these are large companies to whom this provision will apply. People are singing about poem, but out of tune I feel. I don't know if you're aware, but place of effective management. For certain companies outside which are effectively controlled from India, they are treated to be resident in India and therefore are potentially subject to global tax in India. This provision was in place from 1st April 2015, but the rules related to that had come out in draft form only in December. Very confusing, ambiguous rules. So they've decided that, oh, this is too much, you better defer it. So it's deferred, but to April 16, so it will come into play very soon. Most people thought when it's deferred, it will go back to next year. Not the case. From 1st April this year, it will apply. And GAR is reiterated, will come into effect from April of next year. Something new which has been introduced called an equalization levy, again coming out of the BEPS proposals. BEPS is, sorry, I should have clarified, base erosion and profit shifting. Because the allegation against large multinationals is that you shift profits out of countries where you earn profit, where you have business, to low tax jurisdictions. So it's also called a Google tax in the tax world. But what is proposed here? It's going to be applicable to a non-resident who does not have a permanent establishment in India. Effectively no place of business in India, loosely speaking. It will apply at the rate of 6% of the gross consideration, exceeding 1 lakh rupees, which is nothing. It has to be deducted by the payer while paying to the non-resident. Otherwise, that payer will not get a deduction for that expenditure in his own taxes. So they're making sure it is properly deducted. Not yet notified, will be soon notified by the government. The worry here is, the first thing is India is first off the block, by the way. We are the torchbearer on this. No other country that I know of has yet implemented this. We are the first to go. Like CSR, we were pretty much the first to go. The worry here is that the definition of what is covered, today's online advertisements, digital advertisements and so on, the definition of what it applies to could be broader. Second, these non-residents will not get the benefit of a tax credit in their home country because this has not been introduced in the Income Tax Act. This levy is a Chapter 8 introduced in the Finance Bill, and therefore no credit will be available under the Double Tax Avoidance Treaty which India has with that country. So I don't know whether this was intended or not, but certainly that's the impact. There has been a one-time dispute resolution scheme that has been introduced. I will not go into this in detail except to touch only on one thing because it relates to a lot of foreign companies, which is the aspect of retrospective amendments. And what they have said is that you can, if you've been hit by a retrospective amendment, you have the ability and permission to go under this scheme and settle by paying only the tax arrears, not interest, not penalty, only the tax arrears. The difficulty here is that if I am somebody who's aggrieved by this, I'm going to say, hold on, you've claimed a tax on me by making a retrospective amendment. I'm not liable to pay that tax. Why should I pay it up? So there's a fundamental issue here. I don't know how many people will come up and take this up or not, but we'll see. A small change in the investment allowance, which is available as a deduction at the rate of 15%. What happens is when you acquire plant and machinery, you may or may not install it in the same year. What they're now saying is, so long as you've acquired it and so long as you install it before March 17, you will still get the benefit of this in the year of installation. So some of these proposals are to rationalize and simplify the law. Some tax incentives which are available for employment generation. This is a provision which was there earlier. What they've done is simplify that provision and say that if you have additional employees, a little bit of debate on what that means, and their salary is below a certain limit, and they work for only 240 days instead of the earlier 300 days, etc., etc. Some conditions are there, but you do get a weighted deduction, an additional 30% deduction for that. I think a very interesting and welcome change is the patent law which has been, or the patent box regime which has been developed. I think this is going to encourage a lot of R&D in India. You are allowed 100% deduction for the R&D. And on top of that, the patent that is developed, the royalty that you earn from those patents will be taxed only at 10%. I think an excellent move. It will, I hope, generate much more R&D, in India. They've put in some safeguards. It's only the true and first inventor who will get the benefit of this. There's a small change relating to the period of holding for long-term capital gains benefit for unlisted shares, and that has been reduced from 3 to 2 years. Interestingly, it's there in the budget speech, but there is no mention of this, there is no clause of this in the finance bill. You know, the finance minister can say what he likes, but it has to be introduced in the bill for it to be part of the law. And this is another small change which is as a result of several court judgments where closely held private companies held by non-residents will now be taxed at 10%. When he announced last year that the corporate tax rate will be reduced from 30 to 25 in a period of 4 years, he also said that I'm going to remove deductions and exemptions. That process has been started, and I've only listed a couple of them. There are many of these which have been listed. I won't go into the details, but for example, if you set up an SEZ before April 1 to 2020, you will get the benefit of the tax holiday. SEZs after that will not. Capital expenditure and acquisition of any right to use spectrum. Spectrum auctions will happen soon. So that's going to be allowed as an amortization over the period of the license. Very good change in terms of 14A. This is when you invest and earn exempt income. If you have borrowings and you claim deductions of interest, etc., that was being significantly disallowed. Huge litigation on this happening. What they've done is simplify it. They've also said it will be just 1% of the monthly average value of the investments, limited to the expenditure. This was being misused by tax officers and a lot of litigation. Hopefully it will clear up at least quite a lot of it. And coming to taxes to be collected, this is just 1% tax to be collected on vehicle sales. This is to do with sales over of vehicles costing more than 1 lakh or other items which are where you have cash dealings. So they want to make sure that they track these and cover them so that tax evaders are caught out. Significant procedural changes have been brought in. I'm sure Anil will deal with some of them relating to interest, refunds, penalties, return filing, etc. I wanted to just quickly touch on this. There's been a lot of discussion in the media on this relating to recognized provident funds, superannuation fund which are approved, and the national pension scheme. Some other changes have been brought in, but primarily what has been said is that 60% of the accumulated balance will be taxed at the time of withdrawal. Which accumulated balance? Only those contributions which start from April 16, not up to 31st March. So going forward, and if you withdraw them then, and do not invest them in an annuity which is notified by the government, then 60% of that will be taxed. There will be a lot of debate, is it only employees' contribution, interest, etc. As the bill stands today, it is 60% of the accumulated balance. That's what it is. If it goes to a nominee after death, that's exempt. And this is primarily, as the FM calls it, a move towards an exempt, taxable type of regime for tax purposes. And he claims it is meant to create a pension society. So, I know a lot of debate on this. Probably you won't see a rollback on this because there's, I think, a lot of politics involved in this. Let me close with that, and I'm going to ask Anil for him to come up and make his comments. Thank you. We'll take questions at the end after all the panelists.
Dr. Kanodia, Mr. Sundararani, and friends. India does manage to win a few gold medals at the Olympics nowadays, but if there had been a gold medal for the maximum number of amendments made to any law over a period of time, we would have been winning it all these years. Jay has just told you that there are 238 clauses in the finance bill relating to the different laws, when 110 out of these relate to the Income Tax Act. And considering that the Act has been in existence since 1961, that is for a period of 55 years, if you take even just 60 amendments on an average, that will come to 3,300 amendments in all these years. So you know that if you want to make your head spin, you don't have to go to Disney World, you just have to read the Income Tax Act. In addition to the 110 clauses relating to the Income Tax Act, there are 3 schemes which are to be administered by the Income Tax Department. One is the Equalization Levy, about which Jay has informed you. The second is the Income Disclosure Scheme, and the third is the Direct Tax Dispute Resolution Scheme. One point that Jay did mention was about the rates of tax, but I wanted to point out to you that for individuals now, the rate of tax is higher than for companies. This has changed over a period of time. At one time, companies used to be taxed much higher than individuals were, but then for some time they were equal, and now individuals will have to pay more if the income is more than 1 crore. So as you can see, the basic rate is 30%, the surcharge, not service charge, the surcharge is 4.5%, and the cesses are 1.035%, that comes to 35.535%. This is still better than